Hello? Hello? Oh, fuck. Oh my god. Fuck. God damn. One sec. Okay, I'm just preparing for the fucking debate. We're going right into it. I gotta fucking do this.
Oh, there he is. There's the man of the hour. All right, I'm getting started. Hey guys, welcome to Politically Provoked, an interactive podcast where we host debates, panels, and interviews. If this is your first time joining us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to keep up to date with all our future debates and panels. We are primarily on YouTube, but you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Discord, BitChute, TikTok, and Instagram. All the information is in the banner below. We also have a link tree you can find in the description, or you can just search Politically Provoked and we should pop right up. We are a neutral ground where people from across the political spectrum can either duke it out in a debate or just have a casual discussion in one of our panels. Either way, we try to represent both left and right-wing views on every episode. So I'm your host, Brittany, and this is my co-host, Todd. How are you?
Doing great, Britt.
Doing good. All right, so yeah, we are pretty late, but we are here. So we are going to be debating vanguardism and reform, and I don't know what it is actually. I'm gonna let Dylan talk about what the topic is.
Ooh,
So,
okay.
hi, how are you?
So, do I just give my little introduction as per
Yeah,
usual?
just introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
All right, I'm Dylan. On the political spectrum, I'd be far left. I'm a councilist and moreover a left com. You can find me in the Discord. You can find me on Spotify at Dylan Blay, Instagram at Dylan Blay _. Yeah, generally speaking, I'm taking a super reformist approach and an anti-vanguard approach tonight.
All right. All right. Next up is Oz. Welcome.
Hey, what's up?
Better late than never. Yeah, so you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm Haas. I'm a Marxist-Leninist, and I was interested in left communism when I was 14 years old, like 10 years ago. So there's that. Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Each person can give an opening statement. It can be as little as 1 minute, no longer than 5, about the topic and your stance. After that, we'll open up the floor. To those watching, if you have any questions, tag Politically Provoked who your question is addressed to. We will jot them down and get to them at the end. We'll do closing statements and final thoughts after the Q&A. So, Dylan, let's get going with our opening
All right.
statement.
So, today, I'm here to discuss with my opponent the practicality of reforms and revolution. I'll also be representing a more Bernsteinist reformist approach to achieving socialism. I think, personally, the Marxist-Leninist approach to socialism bears no practical value in the context of 21st century America, and many of the political strategies that come with Leninist philosophy, such as vanguardism, are obsolete, especially now considering the power exerted by the bourgeois. Many historians agree that Leninism has the logical conclusion as well of Stalinism, and although I'm not an orthodox Marxist, my ideal outcome, in my opinion, is the closest one can get to the Marxist definition of communism.
Oh, okay. Oz.
Yeah, my position is basically that there's no such thing as Marxism. Without Marxism, Leninism, it's a complete absurdity. The only reason anyone cares about Marxism is because at one point in history, 25% of the world's population lived under Marxist-Leninist governments, and that's actually the people who made Marxism actually relevant and mean something. Hundreds of years, not hundreds, but a century and a half after Marx died, and now the most powerful country on earth with over 1 billion people. The ascendant power, I should say, the soon-to-be most powerful country on earth, is led by a Marxist-Leninist party. Now, there's a lot of claims that are being made about so-called Leninist theories of vanguardism, which doesn't make any sense to me as someone who actually knows the history. You will not find these phrases in Lenin's writings. It was a truism for all Marxists in Lenin's time that the proletariat can only fulfill its interests through an independent party. This was true for the European Social Democrats at the time. It only stopped being true, possibly, during the period of the so-called left communists, which emerged around the time after the First World War, as a reaction to the decay of Western social democracy. Finally, I would like to challenge Dylan as to where in Marx's writings does Marx define communism as a certain type of society with X and Y characteristics. As far as I know, as someone who's actually read Marx himself and not Twitter leftists, Marx said, "By communism we mean the real movement, which sublates the present state of things." He was pretty blunt about the fact that there's no blueprint for communism. There's no idealized vision for what a communist society is supposed to be. I mean, this much is evident in both Marx and Engels' writings consistently. So I'm not really sure where he's getting this idea of, an end goal of communism from.
Go
Right.
on.
So I guess we're opening up the floor here, right? Basically, the definition I'm trying to achieve is I'm sure you've heard this one countless times. It's the stateless, classless, moneyless society, right? And in a sense, I'd argue that I'm more of a revisionist than anything. So the goal is to try and get to that definition. Whether it was written by Marx or not, I really don't give a shit. However, that being said, I think that's the ideal outcome, considering there is value to statements like the workers should own the means of production and we should have a dictatorship of the proletariat. So really, what I'm trying to get at here is that it doesn't matter to me what Marx wrote. However, whatever Marx wrote did lay down the groundwork for the ideas that I'm basically espousing today.
And how is
Whether
that?
people misinterpreted it or not.
Okay, how is that? How did Marx lay the foundation for your ideas? Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess you can look at I think certain ideas perpetuate, this very pro-working class set of ideologies, right? Like when we look at the labor theory of value, something like that is absolutely
Something that was invented by the classical political economist and not Marx himself.
right. But Marx espoused it, and the thing is that when Marx,
What do you mean he espoused it? Many
states-
argue that Marx was the first devastating critique of the labor theory of value, anticipating its eventual abandonment through marginalism and others. I guess
right,
Marx.
So I'm not necessarily a labor theory of value person, as I'm more of a subjective theory of value type of person. However, that being said, the way in which this was written about led to, whether it was misinterpreted or not, this is sort of how we got to where we
How
are
is that?
today.
Can you elaborate about how it was written so we can actually be clear about why we're talking about Marx? Because we don't have to talk about Marx. I mean, I just want to know why we're talking
Generally
about him.
speaking, I'm not really here to talk about Marx, but I think that, in terms of like when, you see the Communist Manifesto and the impact that's had on broader society, I think that,
Which impact do you have in mind? Do you have the impact of leading to an outcome of the world's, largest countries being ruled by communist parties, effectively transforming the world? Or are you talking about like Noam Chomsky talking about it in like
no,
his
I'm talking
university?
about obviously like the Bolsheviks and the October Revolution.
Like the people who made the whole thing relevant, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't disagree with you on that front. I agree in every context that they're like socialist countries. There's nothing to disagree upon there.
So what I want to get at is, what I'd like to ask you is, you're basically saying Marxism, Leninism has no applicability in 21st century America whatsoever. And you call yourself a council communist and Bernstein, all this. So you're basically talking about the things that were never successful in seizing power or affecting any meaningful change or transformation for their countries. And you're basically saying that the people who were successful are actually the failures. So I'm interested to know why they're failures in your mind.
Yeah, so my big issues with things like revolutions, especially when we apply it today, is that it's impractical to apply something like a revolution. We look at the context of the October Revolution. We're talking about Imperial Russia under the Tsar, right? There's obviously not a lot of infrastructure. It's a monarchy. The people are getting fed up with it. There's, of course, broader socialist movements like the Mensheviks and all of these other parties, right, that represent, sort of these communist ideals.
Sure.
And necessarily, while that was practical at the time, I don't necessarily think that can be applied to a country like America today with the, the most overinflated military budget in the world. And the fact that I think the only way that we're going to ever achieve some type of actual socialism in America is through reforms.
Okay. So did Marxists invent revolutions? Is that what you're trying to say? Or
no.
So what did Bolsheviks and Marxist Leninists, what do they, since I guess right? What do they actually say about revolutions and the relationship they have to the process of arriving at political power? Do Marxist-Leninists...
Marxism-Leninism, like, I'm not sure if you want to talk about, like, actually what Lenin wrote or,
or
the practice, because I was more so referring to the practice and the fact that there was a revolution, that did take place, and I feel like this type of Leninism isn't really applicable to the context.
There was a revolution, but whose fault was that? That there was a revolution? Was it Lenin's fault, or did the revolution happen before Lenin wrote his April thesis and the October Revolution following an actual revolution that the Bolsheviks had nothing to do with? So likewise for the Chinese, did they enact some kind of revolution, or was that the Republicans? There were Chinese Republicans who enacted the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, the Japanese who invaded Chinese soil. I mean, Marxist-Leninists don't really have a reputation for voluntarily just declaring that they want a revolution and then acting upon that impulse. The whole point of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism isn't to just put your foot in the ground and say, we need a revolution. It's more
Mhm.
so recognizing the objectivity of revolutions and preparing a party. Making a party means that's a weird word. Making it prepared and tested and cognizant of the fact that revolutions are things that happen objectively. The state does not come from thin air. The state has material premises, and it will be tested by those material premises. And in those such moments, the party must be prepared for a revolutionary moment. I don't know why communists, or whatever you want to call them, should shoot themselves in the foot and say, no, revolutions will never happen, and the state is eternal, and it'll always just exist, and it'll never encounter institutional or structural crises like the ones we're seeing now in America. We should just sit back and let Biden and the liberals take care of this, and we should not seek to seize hegemony over the war of how the American people make sense of this institutional crisis.
Right. So I think it's moreover an important thing that a way we initially get our foot through the doors with social reforms. Like you look at politicians, whether you like him or not, Bernie Sanders, I mean, if we talk about like, Medicare for all and we put that into practice, that's going to, you know, remove some type of hierarchical distinction between people who are in the working class and people who are, the
So
bourgeois, right? If
I'm
we
just kind
tax
of
them higher
confused.
and more
Maybe,
disproportionately.
yeah, maybe I'm focusing too much on labels. I'm a little bit confused. You call yourself a council communist, but in one of Lenin's writings, which is Left Wing Communism and Infantile
Oh
Disorder,
no.
where he critiques the council communists and other left communist tendencies, he actually lays out pretty explicitly that communists operating in the so-called advanced Western countries, they may have declared bourgeois democracy dead in their head, but it's not actually dead for the masses. This is almost ad verbatim what Lenin said. It may be abolished in your head, but it's not abolished in reality as far as the masses are concerned. So communists, who in this case would be Marxist-Leninists because they're following the teachings of Lenin, have a patient attitude, be cognizant of the objective and material realities, and have to work within the existing form of politics, which means you have to work in parliaments. You have to work to get
Mhm.
so-called reforms passed that actually comprise the site of political struggle, the real one that exists, not the one that you think is the best one. I mean, this has been the consistent communist policy throughout the history of the 20th century. By communist, I mean like the Comintern and um, the Soviet-led, and later, to a lesser extent, Chinese-led communist internationals. No one has ever like had this view of this adventuristic or voluntaristic view where it's like, yeah, we should just have a revolution and ignore the current political realities. It's like if you're a party, you're building an independent party, you just say we want to overthrow the government. I mean, how can you just say you can't just say that?
Right.
You won't have the support of anyone. Um, you're not going to be working within the existing political reality, and like Marxist Leninists would call this a kind of adventuristic, ultra left, and anarchist deviation.
Yeah. So personally, I'm obviously not with that. I was just more here to talk about the context of which we can actually lower discrepancies, in wealth between the bourgeois and the proletarian, right? Which I think is an important thing to think about moreover than objective revolutions that happen. And I think that if a revolution were to happen, because they do happen regarding material conditions in societies that exist and take place, right? I think a society in which sort of the ruling class or the bourgeois have less power and they can exert less power on top of all of these people, right? Like the proletarian, in which we tax them more and we use that money to sort of raise people out of poverty because we are capable to distribute these resources in a way that
Well,
positively benefits society around
but
them.
the problem is that I'm not against, obviously, I'm not against weakening the power of the ruling class, but you will not accomplish this. I mean, you may as well, that may as well lead to a revolutionary crisis. If the state has its basis in a ruling class, and you are seeking to undermine the power of that ruling class, history shows that it is inevitable the ruling class will resort to extra legal and extra state means to repress their opponents. The state does not have a real independent existence outside of its basis in a ruling class. Especially right now in America, we can locate this specific ruling class and its various factions.
Right, and
So,
I completely agree with you that the ruling class obviously resorts to extra legal, ways of keeping the proletarian down. However, like when you look at this and you see the fact that we are taking resources from them and we are lowering discrepancies, right? Because I'm trying to provide opportunities to these members of the working class through getting them, access to healthcare, education, all of these things, so they can sort of raise themselves up and out of poverty, right? I don't want them, if we were to have a revolution, which I see as more of a sort of desperate last push as opposed to because I want to ensure that we have infrastructure in place, and that essentially the revolution that we are having, if we are to, sort of remove anyone from power, it's these bourgeois capital owners. Because necessarily, I don't think that we need to get rid of any types of politicians, more so the people who stand in the way of the revolution, outright.
So, in the history of Marxism, and Marxist-Leninists inherited this was the period of social democracy. There was a distinction that was made between the minimal program and the maximal program. So the minimal program are the things that you're talking about, right? Infrastructure, whatever happens to be the point of political contention of the day, Medicare for all. And then the maximal program is like the further out kind of seizure of power, the proletarian dictatorship, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Now, the pursuit of the minimal program is the basis of how you operate in politics, right? But what Marxists anticipate and recognize is that if you're actually successful in really building a movement which is capable of seeing through these changes that threaten the power of the ruling class, it is inevitable, and this is why you have to be prepared, it is inevitable that you will lead to a political crisis in which the ruling class will make the necessity of revolution or something of that manner up at a certain point inevitable.
Right.
Now,
So I guess we really kind of agree on this then, don't we? Because I do agree with that. Of course, the ruling class is going to make it so it's necessary at some point, when they start to stand in the way because they realize that their power is being essentially seized from them or tried to be taken away from them, that we, essentially they have to fight back. So at any point, the way we take the, sort of these people in positions of power out of power is through some type of final push, whether it's like a revolution or anything like that, whatever means of.
well, usually what happens is that they resort to forms of extra legal intervention that lead to a breakdown of the legitimacy of the state and the institute. They resort to they use the state to do things that the state itself considers illegal and extra institutional. And this basically annihilates the state.
This is more sort of an important factor that I think is important to take in consideration when I'm talking about reforms, which I think is
right. But the whole point of Marxists need to create a party for, as far as not just Marxist-Leninists, but Marxists in general. The whole point is to create a party that is capable of weathering this, surviving this, and preparing itself for this eventual outcome, of having an alternative vision for statehood that will allow it to contend for hegemony. The theory of this is even before fascism, right? The idea of the Social Democrats was the destruction of liberalism is inevitable, but it will lead to some kind of horrible tragedy in the short term, if it's not led by the proletariat. Basically, that's fascism, right? Fascism. There was no Lenin that was forcing this fascism to happen. It happened. Some kind of fundamental change in liberalism is inevitable, right?
I agree with that, but are you? I just want to understand what kind of context you're coming at this from. Is this the tendency for the rate of profit to fall, or
it's a combination of a number of things. So on the one hand, you have economic crisis. That's a big one, right? And with economic crisis comes a breakdown of the legitimacy of the state. You also have another thing Marxists would call revolutions in the forces of production. And according to Marxist theory, the content, the form of the state and the institutions always lags behind the content of the forces of production revolutionizing. So when this happens, all of a sudden, the state and its institutions become outdated with regard to some kind of more fundamental historical and technological change. And at that point, it becomes a site of political antagonism and so on and so on. So there's many factors. It's not just the specific economic crisis, but it's also the inability for
Social
states.
crisis.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, I don't know. I was surprised that you and I would agree on this, essentially. I mean, I think you and I generally were both pretty well on the same page for this end of things. I don't know. I try to look through, some of your content on YouTube to see if I could find like a concrete position on this. And it was difficult to find, but I didn't have much time to sort of comb through that, right? I mean, we can move on to vanguard parties, right? Because there's something I'm sure you and I have like an absolute disagreement on.
Okay, sure.
Right. So my argument is that vanguard parties, when used, and this extends past Leninism, like we look at the Nazi vanguard party as well. I think the transferal of power into the hands of revolutionaries just creates a newer bourgeois class.
Okay. What transfer are you referring to?
So essentially, if you have a vanguard party that comes in and has a revolution against the state, and they come and seize the power in the state, and we have these oligarchic sort of, because I think that the revolutionaries themselves, when they come into power, they still have control over the resources the state previously had disposal of. And of course, since I don't necessarily think there's a dictatorship of the proletariat in the sense that there's not really a direct democracy, and or the fact that these vanguards can use the resources against the people to oppress them. Moreover, a changing of power into different hands.
Okay, this is quite a sweeping claim. So the reason I asked you why is there a transfer of power first, before we get into the other stuff, is the idea that there's a transfer of power to the party assumes that there is some kind of spontaneous sovereignty of the people that the party steals. But actually, there is no expression of sovereignty of any people, of any class, of any collective, outside a specific organ of representation and reflection. And this is what a party is. The issue that you're describing, finally, for the second issue, and we actually can look at history to see if this is actually what happened or not, what you're describing is corruption. That's what it would be called, corruption. So basically, people are using the state, they're using their position of power to fulfill personal pathological ends, right? To get
right. So do you not think that that's like almost inevitable with a vanguard party, considering you set up these conditions that allow a small class or small group of people to be the ones to immediately have these assets?
Okay. The issue is...
They can exercise authority over people, which is my big issue with the whole concept of the vanguard party.
Right. Do you want to let me...
I'm not going to deny the practicality of it in the context of China under Mao, right?
You want to let me finish?
Even under Deng, right? Like if Deng made these market liberalizations and reforms to make the economy better,
can we hold your horses, please? Do you want to let me finish? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what you're describing is corruption, because even though it's really awkward to say, like, the resources are in the hands of the party, but how? Is it like directly? Is there a form of direct control, or is it more indirect through enterprises and organs? Like, does the party directly have I mean, we'd have to get into like information theory and talk about the details of Soviet planning throughout the various stages of its existence. But no, the party did not have like direct control over everything to the point where individuals can just be openly corrupt. Now, the problem of corruption is an inevitability of any state. It's not unique to the form of a party. It is any state on planet Earth is going to have a problem with corruption. What we do find in history is that actually communist states are uniquely disposed with the ability to eliminate corruption. More so than bourgeois democratic states, because in bourgeois democratic states, corruption, even discounting the ones that exist secretly, is legal. It's legal in the form of open bribery of politicians by special interests in order to fulfill their goals, and politicians using their special personal connections and so on and so on. So The
Wait,
issue
so
of corruption.
I need
Yeah.
to just say something really quickly.
Yeah.
Do you not think that in the immediate aftermath of there being a revolution, which often leads to a period of crisis and lack of infrastructure, systems, and social safety nets, so that people can rely on these, leaving these sort of decisions in the hands of a select few people, where they can make these decisions, especially considering immediately we put all the power in the hands of these people, because
But you haven't. That's the thing. You haven't. So you said we put our hands in the power of the people, but there is no we. Again, any collective, mass people, any country, right? It doesn't have a spontaneous form of unreflexive sovereignty. Its expression of sovereignty will be mediated in the form of some kind of representative organ. Okay, so there is no we giving them power.
right. So do you think giving control to that representative organ can allow the representative organ to oppress the
Okay,
people?
if you are
Because that
giving
representative organ is controlled by a small group of people.
you,
And
okay,
of course, this doesn't give the actual working class proletarians and the
I don't know
revolutionaries
if
a say.
you're have a hearing problem and you can't hear me, but I'll repeat it again. When you say we are handing control, who is we? What control did you have before you handed it to them? Who are you to hand them control? What are you? Well, who are you? Are you an
You're
organization?
essentially a worker leaving it in the reins of these revolutionaries. And yeah, you may have had a say in who the revolutionaries are, but how they act after you, or how they
Okay,
act,
so now you're
essentially
talking
after
about
the transfer of power occurs, is
you're talking
completely
about
up to them.
workers now. So what you mean to say is workers hand the control over to the party, right?
Right.
So what form of control did workers have before they so-called handed it over to the party?
Well, not much. I mean, if
None
if
at
we're
all.
talking about in
They
the
had
framework
none.
of
They had none at all. Because in
right,
order to have
okay.
control, you have to have organization. And organization is the beginning of a form that stands apart and is intelligibly distinct from the unreflexive flux of spontaneous masses.
So
Okay?
other than a philosophical difference, what differentiates the vanguards from the previous people who, because if there's a revolution, there's an immediate
Yeah, the,
transfer
the,
of
the, the, the
assets.
vanguard represents the interests of the people.
So I'm a vanguard, and I just say, all right, I've gotten myself into this position by manipulating and conning my way around and doing all this stuff.
Is that how they
to get
got into their
myself in.
position? I think
Pardon?
that's a rank revision of history. Is that how the vanguard, so-called vanguard, got into its position? That's not true. In what circumstance was it true that the vanguard party got into the position of power through the use of Machiavellian cunning and manipulation? That's just not true.
Right. So do you not think that that's not very possible? Because this is a damn well thing that could happen with
Okay.
that.
Well, then,
Politicians do this routinely, and if you want to talk about Machiavellianism, hell, I mean, even look at Stalin. That was his favorite book, The Prince.
okay, we can talk about Stalin in a second because I actually do want to talk about Stalin in a second. But I think what you're not really recognizing when you're overinflating the significance of corruption is that politics is actually an objective, intelligibly distinct sphere from the sphere of civil society and its various private individual interests. In other words, there is an objective sphere of politics. Now, if a so-called vanguard is just going to completely ignore and forget about its original mission and just become immediately corrupt, it probably won't be able to maintain power for very long. That's the simple truth. States.
Right. So what kind of checks and balances come into play to hold the vanguard party accountable?
The notion
They're
of
given immediate control over the resources if they're the
okay.
representatives.
We're talking about a lot of things at once. So checks and balances is a form of what Marxists would call bourgeois formalism. And I'll explain why. So in the case of checks and balances, you try to make the objective and material premises of state rule, you try to formalize those, right? Because the state is not all-powerful. That's just objectively true. No state is all-powerful. It is literally impossible. States have a material premise. They have a material premise in a certain class, or they have a material premise in general in the people, and the people over whom they rule and preside over. Without this, a state could not last, right? As Putin said, no state can survive without the legitimacy coming from the people. In
So
one
you
way
don't
or
think the
another.
state can coerce
Well,
people
let
into
me
doing
finish.
things on
Please,
behalf of the state?
Dylan, let me finish my point because it's really important. Okay? What Marxists would reproach you with saying is that you don't actually need to formalize these material premises because they're actively suspended in reality. If you study the history of communist states and even today's communist China, you will see how the Communist Party is very receptive and very cognizant of the feedback that it's getting on the ground from the people. Um, and there's a dynamic relationship between the two. So when you ask the question, what are the checks and balances? The checks and balances come from the public itself over whom they're residing power. Communist Party is not all powerful, it is not all knowing, and it is not omnipotent. It
Right.
gains
So
its legitimacy and its logistical and operative mechanisms from a dialectic relationship with the people.
right. So you don't think a party could basically come in and, allocate resources in a certain way, shape, or form to, say, the military, to keep the military over like ruling and, essentially kind of coercing people into doing jobs with the threat of death or things like that? Because people are going to be essentially, if it becomes a work or die dichotomy, then they're probably going to choose
Well,
work.
in that case, first of all, um, it's not a work or die dichotomy. It's in a circumstance of war, which is the Civil War. It's a work or die dichotomy, not because you're going to get shot if you don't work, because if you don't work, no one's going to be able to eat, right? Food doesn't come from the sky. So if you don't work, how are we going to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and shelter ourselves, right? Someone has to do this work. In a period of crisis, when you're pressed directly to those conditions. Um, Now, second of all, this stuff about allocating resources to the military, well, in the later stages of the Soviet Union's existence after World War II, a, a huge proportion of its resources and so on were allocated to the military. But does this represent a form of corruption, or does this represent the Soviet Union trying to secure itself against the real and imminent danger posed by an aggressive West and America, who had revitalized their own military-industrial complex, clearly anticipating some kind of war? If you can't protect your state, you will be squashed and eliminated. So how are you supposed to protect your sovereignty and your own state? I
Right.
mean,
So when you allocate
what
all
you're
these resources,
so you would rather advocate that Soviet peoples and other peoples living in communist countries, they should just allow foreigners to completely seize their country and see as they do fit with their country.
not really. That's not
Well,
necessarily the
if you
case.
don't have a very powerful military, that's what's going to happen.
Right. So you can have a powerful military, which is obviously the way that, Bolsheviks after World War II went about it, right? And I
And
mean,
before.
China as well, they have a very powerful military. But essentially, to sort of avert the kind of crises that come with allocating so many resources directly to the military, instead of actually, like, because there's going to be discrepancies from a point of where the military gets all these resources, the resources that are going to be given to the people are lesser. So essentially, what I'm trying to advocate for here is through reforms, essentially, I think
But
America, which is one of the leading power in the world right now,
yeah,
right? And
but
we can't retain their
your
military.
example is completely bankrupt because you used an example of the Soviet Union's need to have a powerful military as an example for why reforms are necessary. But in order to argue that, you have to argue that in the context of the events of the collapse of the Russian Empire, your path, your special path, would have been preferable or more possible even than the Bolshevik way. So
So the
that's what
thing
you
is,
would have
I'm
to
not
argue.
necessarily trying to argue this in the context of Bolshevik,
Then you
like
can't
that point in
you
time. I'm
can't
trying to argue though for
yeah.
modern day America, right? I want to talk about contextualizing,
But the
you know,
reasoning you're giving for why it is in modern day America we need so-called reformism is because you're saying a powerful military will be necessary.
well, a powerful military at the time was still oppressed by the, well more expansive and powerful West. So I think that the only way one can really achieve true socialism from here is have the dominant power in the world essentially reform to socialism in some
That
capacity.
was the prevailing view um, among Marx, Engels, and Marxists and the Bolsheviks themselves until the facts of history proved otherwise. The fact of the matter is that you cannot gamble on. The fact of the matter is that it was a misinterpretation that was really coming from the baggage of Hegelian idealism, that revolutions will begin from the advanced countries. Well, as we're seeing, this theory has already been disproven. China was centuries behind America when the Communist Party seized power, and now China is genuinely catching up and remaking the world. Um, the theory is being disproven right before our eyes that America, uh, success and victory of socialism depends upon a revolution in the most powerful country, because America will not be the most powerful country forever.
Right. So my big issue is that America using the resources at its disposal, because you and I agreed earlier that the strongest power in the world is going to, push back if it is threatened, right? So I think you and I agreed on this. So when
Yeah.
America, essentially, it's going to become a battle of China and America, which I'd argue it's already started becoming. And the big concern is that the superpower that is America is going to repress China. If China, is leading the socialist movement, and
Yeah.
they're under
Chi-
constant threat by America.
China has a long-term strategy that is not dependent upon what we in America do. We, so-called communists in America, need China. China does not need us. We are the ones who have to learn from China, the most successful.
Right, so China's going to become threatened at an eventual point by America, whether it's and I'm not talking
It
about
already is.
communists living in America. They already are under threat by America.
Yeah.
And the liberal sort of democratic establishment is the one, threatening China.
But
They
China,
constantly misinform and spread misinformation about China to get people to turn their backs in the West on the ideals of China.
I
And
agree.
eventually it's going to become threatened enough that China is going to get serious pushback from America. And America is going to, I'd argue, go for some kind of war with China.
I agree,
And
but the leaders of China are anticipating this and preparing for it. And if you ask me, the odds do not look good as far as America's prospects at being successful in this endeavor.
so that's a big fundamental concern for me, though, is that the most powerful democracy, or not like liberal democratic bourgeois country with these resources that it has, available to it, is going to come in and essentially stomp the entire movement. And it's capable of that in this very moment. And if China becomes more and more of a threat, that's what it's going to come to. And I'd argue that militaries, in the West, are going to form alliances and find ways to oppress China.
So
and destroy what they
I'm
built.
not sure what this point is about. I agree that communists should work to do the best they can to win in America. I agree with that. In order to prevent war and so on and so on. I'm just making the point that China is not waiting for us.
Right. So I'm just trying to say that the best method of going about achieving global communism and socialism without actually having an immediate threat or presenting threats to, everyone's basically lives of everyone are jeopardized when, America starts going, well, you have to go to war. Well, we offer these incentives to the military and the people who fight in these battles, right? So I'd argue, which I've been trying to argue this whole time, that the reforms that one can make in America to get to a point where we become the sort of, the proletarians in America and Canada and all throughout North America, and basically established strong infrastructured Western democracies and Western nations, which have their issues rooted in liberal democracy. However, there's opportunities available in which, the global communists can seize, even if it's minor positions of power, which, it might not necessarily make a difference in the long run. However, any effort in preventing the loss of life and casualties caused by essentially revolutions is what I'm arguing from this ultra reformist approach. And then eventually, it's basically a brand of centrist Marxism. I'm sure you've heard that term thrown around, right? That I'm in between. I tether in between reform and revolution. However, I'm leaning reform because I think that's an important approach to setting up the conditions in which the proletarian can lose, have the least casualties, suffer the least, grave, dangerous, and consequences of war, right? Okay. And essentially set up a better, I guess you'd say, overall world, considering now communists and Chinese and American communists and socialists are the ones who are, at the forefront.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the issue here, and I tried to point this out to you before, is that you're treating politics like a strategy game where you have control and you actually can choose what outcome it is. Revolutions are very unpleasant things. That's the truth. There's nothing pleasant about revolutions. I agree.
Right.
But
So wouldn't you say then the most immediate thing we can do is try to control for all the variables possible because we have
I
certain
think the
factors
best
around us
thing,
and surrounding us that we can
yeah, yeah.
manipulate.
I think the
Right? So if
best
I
thing,
manipulate conditions,
I think the best thing you can do right now is stop interrupting me because I think you're just kind of embarrassing yourself.
how am I embarrassing myself?
Well, because you're not letting me. I don't know. I'm trying to explain it to you, but you just keep interrupting me when I
Right. So
try to
I've
explain it.
responded to. I'm trying
Dylan,
to
you literally
respond.
just did it again.
No, he just finished his statement there in which
I
he
didn't
said
finish anything. You just interrupted me.
you made a statement and I'm responding to that statement
How do you know that that was my statement?
because you stopped talking.
Can you just shut up for a second?
Christ.
Politics is not a strategy game. We may agree that revolutions are unpleasant, but that does not address the question of whether they're an inevitable fact of reality. All we have to do to understand that they're an inevitable fact of reality is recognize the fact that no state is eternal, no state is divine, no state is omnipotent. States come from dust, and unto dust they shall return. States have a material basis that cannot be controlled, premised, or legislated by the forms that are within the power of the state itself to establish. In other words, the basis of state power is something the state itself cannot legislate formally or establish. So if we recognize this fact, that revolutions are inevitable, however unpleasant they are, this is like if you're a hunter and you're in a jungle and, well, do you like lions and do you like tigers? Probably not. They're pretty unpleasant. But if you're really going to provide for your family in this jungle and be a fucking man, you better prepare yourself for those lions and those tigers, and you better mold yourself in the image of a warrior who can fight lions and tigers and be cognizant and accept that reality. Likewise, a revolutionary isn't somebody who goes around advocating for a revolution because they want to enjoy the chaos and turmoil of a revolution. A revolutionary is just someone who prepares for the inevitable fact and who's sobering up to the cold, hard truths of this world. It's like growing up. But moreover, what confuses me is that I thought that on the question of this business of revolution, the matter was settled. These were your words, not mine. I thought now we're moving on to the question of the Vanguard Party, but it seems like you're all over the place talking about China and America and militaries, and I just don't know what topic we're on. There you go.
Right.
That's
So
my
my big
statement.
issue with that is that it seems to deny the fact that politics has in fact been a strategy game historically. It's all about who can seize power and immediate positions of it, which is why I don't understand what angle you're coming at this from. Because revolutionaries can prepare themselves, obviously, to fight this big war and fight these revolutions and, seize power. However, it would probably be in the revolutionaries' best interest. The faction in which they're trying to lead to success, to have the least casualties and suffer the most. This is going to get the most people on board with your movement and ensure the success of your movement. Essentially,
Again,
politics has an element of strategy to it, and I don't know why that's not being factored in here.
because, okay, this is why politics is not a strategy game. In the case of a strategy game, you are an impersonal, omnipotent actor. You are confined by a certain level of rules, but your camera's hoisted up into the sky. You're like a god looking down, and you get to choose what happens. You get to choose the outcomes that happen, right? But in real life, you actually don't get to choose what reality is. Reality has an objectivity that you have to surrender and submit to. Otherwise, you will fold and be crushed by it. You will just be eliminated. The Bolsheviks prevailed because in the context of the Tsar's Russia, it was a speed run, right? If you want to talk about video games, it was a speed run. They speed run the process by which the most tough, resilient, wise, smart people were the ones that endured and eventually seized power because The people who had your mentality in Tsar's Russia, they would just die in Siberia and then they'd fold and then that's it. They didn't stand a chance because they weren't tough enough to accept the cold hard truths of the reality.
Right.
And
So
when
one can accept the cold hard truths of reality and still play politics as though it were a game. People are subjugated constantly to the laws and the conditions that surround their state. If you don't think that people function out of an individual mindset with this imperative for survival and all of these other factors, because if someone has the ability to exert power over other people, they can remove the resources necessary for this person's survival. They're essentially coercing them to defend something that they may not want to defend. So on top of this, all they have to factor in their own survival rate and all these other things. And I think the denial of that is
what
completely
are you
absurd.
I don't know what you're talking about. Are you saying that what are you saying?
So I'm saying that politics, essentially, especially as people who live in the Western world, if we're trying to factor, in a way for Americans and communists to seize power over here, or find a way to power over here, it is going to have to work within the framework of liberal democracy because we don't have the resources available to us to essentially find some way to lead some kind of uprising or movement. Like the movement is so incredibly small that there's going to have to be a level of this politics game played in order to essentially be successful.
Okay, I don't see how that shows that politics is a game. It's not a game.
It's
not a
absolutely a
strategy.
game. If I'm a democratic socialist or whatever who gets elected into public office and I find ways to make people agree with me, I've got to play these games like, okay, here you go. I've bended my knee and I've given Medicare for all and I've given
Yeah.
all these policies and all these reforms to make people want to agree with me. So the game I'm playing here is that when I essentially offer these policies to the people, it's not just in an effort to increase their quality of life, but it's to make them agree with me and or like the direction
Here's the
we're taking the
problem.
country in.
Here's the problem is that communists are not bending their knees. You can be bending your knees. That's fine. Bending. This is what I'm saying this because when you talk about politics, you kind of sound like Mussolini. Like you're not actually participating in the class struggle. You're just cynically kind of in a detached way, kind of just operating in it in order to fulfill some kind of final ends. This isn't the communist position, even as far as the relation between the minimal and maximal program is. Lenin is very clear about the fact that it's not just the fact that you have to use the system. It's that you don't have your own system you can pull out of your ass. You're in reality, you're participating in this reality. It's not a game, this is a reality, it is a real site of struggle. And you have to be cognizant of that fact and participate in it because that's where the reality is. It's not a question of what is the final goal or what is the final ends. It's a question of that.
Right, so the material conditions surrounding the fact that I'm trying to make the world a better place for everyone, the working class especially, when I play my little politics game, which I've said, and you can say this, that I'm being cynical, that I'm doing this, Machiavellian thing or whatever, but I'm acting like when I legislate and choose to be, some kind of legislator, I'm acting in sort of altruistically in the best interest of the people.
Yeah,
and in order to find my way.
That was the bourgeois socialists of the Communist Manifesto, the Fabians, who thought that they were elevated above all struggle and that they were empathetically acting like Daenerys Targaryen as a benevolent kind of aristocrat for the people.
Right, so I don't need to act like a benevolent aristocrat. I can come from like a very grassroots position and still help people through playing the game of politics. If that's what leads to better outcomes for the working class, and I only care about the material conditions that surround them. I don't see why there's an issue.
But there's people who think like you, like AOC, and AOC just sits on her ass and can't do anything when she's in power. So, I mean, maybe you can do it. Go do it. Don't let me stop you,
Hey, I'm going to try and do it. That's essentially the plan. And yeah, I think AOC and her
okay, and is there going to be like, are you going to have like a measurement of like, okay, now I realize I failed and I didn't know what I was talking about? Like, how many years will it take for you to realize that you're wrong? Like, if you fail.
I mean, I'm going to have to like actually experience this firsthand.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about experiencing objective reality, then I'm going to have to go through the paces of essentially leading my little conquest of socialism or whatever this is. But I don't think that through playing the game of politics, you can deny the very real benefits in the Western world that someone like Bernie Sanders has provided to the movement.
Yeah, but I think we would disagree about why, And then the second thing is, do you watch Game of Thrones?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I think you're getting a lot of things from Game of Thrones.
Nope. I
You
just
sure
read the
about
premise.
that?
Yep, I've never
Are you
watched an
sure?
episode of Game of Thrones.
Okay. Well, I think we've gotten off topic, and you're talking about your idea of what you want to do, and I don't know why it's relevant. Like, do what you want to do. Don't let me stop you. I don't know, but I don't see how you've put forward a convincing argument for why communists should not strive to have independent parties.
So I don't have an issue with communists having independent parties. Like, that's not my problem with the vanguard. My problem is with the relationship between the proletarian and some of the vanguards. And I think
what is
that
that
a
relationship?
society in which we play politics, like I've said,
So
is a society
the
in which
first thing I want to ask you is,
we need to reduce the amount of harm felt by the working class. And this is, you're saying, oh, you need to prepare yourself for this fucking revolution, all this shit, right? My thing is, if this is avoidable in any way, shape, or form, we can try to avoid it, and we can move in a direction where we can, reduce the harm. That's essentially the goal here. And of course, there's going to be suffering. Of course, there's going to be strife. And I've accepted that. That is just a fact, like you said, of objective reality. However, that being considered, any way to reduce or minimize the harm, and of course, minimize the loss of people who actively participate in the movement, because if there's bloodshed, that means you're losing valuable members of the party of the movement.
so I think
And
you're basically
we can
arguing
play
that,
politics and get away from that.
okay, I don't think this is a discussion about the philosophy of harm reduction, which I don't agree with anyway. But
Okay.
so you're speaking for yourself. I don't share your philosophy that the whole goal is to reduce suffering. This sounds like a Western Buddhist, like, hippie shit that I have nothing to do with. But
All right.
what I'm trying to reel us back into a discussion about why I should not strive for an independent party. You mentioned that you have an issue with the relationship vanguards have with the proletariat, and I just don't know what you're talking about when you say things like that.
So the thing is throughout this whole conversation, you've been saying all this stuff that has to do with, states will wither in the dust, but states will put up resistance. And when the state puts up resistance, this can lead to destroying the working class as well and the people who live within this country, which is why I've been talking about playing politics this whole time, this Machiavellian approach.
Well,
it might seem like sinister, but the end goal is supposed to be altruistic.
that makes for like a good TV show, but
I'm sure it does, but still.
What I'm trying to say is that
okay.
So what you're saying is that my argument was that parties should prepare themselves for an eventual revolutionary situation, and you said no, they should not do this because states.
I never said that. Don't put words into my mouth.
Well, I'm not. Okay.
That's not what I said.
What I said. Please clarify.
Wait. What I said was that the working class can prepare itself for, of course, revolution and remain resilient and strong and avoid, succumbing to whatever happens, because a revolution obviously is inevitable. We've agreed upon this. However, you don't think that the harm that comes with a revolution should be avoided if it can be? Like, there's steps one can take.
That's the operative.
To ensure that problems that come with revolutions are less so.
Then how will you?
And the denial of that is absurd.
Okay, then how will you ensure that in those steps?
So there are precautions we can take, which is why I've been advocating thirdly for reforms the whole time.
Who is we?
Wait. I'm giving you an example right now. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. The bourgeois has the monopoly on capital, and by proxy, the monopoly on resources. So if the bourgeois puts up a resistance to this working class movement, basically what they're able to do by putting up a resistance to the working class movement is they're able to inflict more harm to these, the proletarian. By inflicting harm on the proletarian, we're losing essentially this sort of ensured success. So when I take precautions in advance through reforms, through higher taxes, through sort of leveling the disparities between the owning class and the proletarian, they are able to put up less resistance. This is a way I can factor into my whole battle plan, which is if I want a socialist end goal, right? By removing power, removing capital from these.
My question is, are you God? Are you God? Is just my question.
Am I God?
Yeah.
You tell me. I'm just kidding.
I don't know. You talk like you're a God who's omnipotent and you have all of this.
So I don't think I'm omnipotent. However, I want you to logically come to this conclusion with me. Do you think a working or a bourgeois class with access to less resources is going to put up as good of a fight as a bourgeois class with a monopoly on power?
I mean, it has in history. The bourgeoisie did not prevail in the Soviet Russia.
Right. So do you think that if the bourgeoisie in Russia had less power, it would have been an easier time for the Bolsheviks to come into power? There would have been less life lost.
No.
You don't think that?
No.
So you don't think that if the bourgeois had less power,
There is no less power. The bourgeoisie has power or it doesn't. If the bourgeoisie
it does have power. However, there is ways of determining which level of power the bourgeois can exert onto other people by the resources they have available to them.
Such as?
All right. You don't think that the fact that the bourgeois has all of this capital that makes it coercive and makes people need to come in to work at these facilities?
I think you're very naive about politics. You're thinking of it like a strategy game where there's like resource meters and you just have to lower the.
So meter. There's not resource meters, but when it follows logically that having more resources in obviously someone else having access to less resources, because no matter how you slice it, if the resources come out of this pool, the big pool, and go into the little pool, there's going to be less necessity for this owning class to sort of manipulate and exploit this,
I think you don't understand that when you start seizing resources, it's really weird how you're wording these things, from the bourgeois class, you are making an act, even if you seize a grain from the ruling class, you're making a symbolic declaration of war. It's not something where there's like a spectrum of how much you can lower it. The minute you lower it a little bit, that's where you've begun a war, right? And that's how the class struggle. It's not how I'm just assuming that you're framing of it in terms of like raising resources or lowering resources.
So do you think that higher taxes are essentially a active war against the bourgeois and the ruling class?
No, oftentimes they're an active war against the people, because raising taxes usually just raises taxes also on working people and normal people. And raising taxes on the rich is really a cope.
So we can do this with percentiles.
I think I can simplify this discussion, actually. Maybe I can get to like the root of what your position is. It kind of sounds like you're like a Malthusian who thinks that classes form on the basis of a war for finite resources. But according to Marxists, there is no eternally finite resources. What there is a given mode of production. And the threshold of any given society's wealth is going to be determined by the level of development of its productive forces. So the real goal for communists is not to seize resources from the ruling class as much as it is to develop the forces of production in a manner that puts the newfound wealth in the hands of the people as opposed to this working ruling class.
So, I completely agree with you on this, actually. Like, I think that's a good thing, and I think we're able to do this if we like subsidize worker cooperatives and things like that in America.
But I don't see why. I don't see why that is. I mean, development of the forces of production doesn't mean you fund certain enterprises because you find them more virtuous or better or more socialistic.
But they're the ones actively getting resources, these finite, material resources, into the hands of the working class. This is just what you just said. This finite resources. If the working class essentially has,
I'm saying I don't agree with your Malthusian position that it's a war over finite resources. I just don't.
Okay, so you don't think that essentially the bourgeois class, who's able to exert pressure onto the working class, which they've done time and time again, right? This is both demonstrated through history and
I think you, in a really bizarre, almost psychotic way, it's like you think that the economic sphere and the political sphere are the same thing, and that like these are the exact same thing, and that the bourgeoisie has economic warfare against. The truth is that politics and economics, the side of those things are discontinuous. So what's happening politically in terms of... So, for example, a political party which represents the proletariat is going to be dealt with by political means. Okay? The primary form of the class warfare, the political class war, is not going to be this battle over resources. It's going to be like, for example, laws passed by states, repressive measures, media campaigns, info wars, things like that, cultural wars. It's not really going to be this thing where it's like, oh, it's a matter of who has the most resources to win the strategy game. It's just not how real life works.
Right, so that agrees with my position then, because politics, you just made it sound like politics are attached to the economy. The bourgeois has access to these resources they have available to them.
Can we stop using the word?
These active, what you said there, these active media campaigns and things like that, and the lobbying is a very real thing that happens, right? To appeal to special interests. This is what essentially the bourgeois are doing to...
Can we please stop using the word resources? It's super weird. It makes it seem like it's Minecraft or something. You just mean money, okay? You're just talking about money, right? Well, an independent party needs money, but there is nothing holding back a party from getting the necessary amount of money to kick. I mean, you realize that even the Democrats are adopting the strategy of small donations. Small donations are really the source of how you get political resources. The combined small donations. I mean, you have to understand something. Even all of this money that these oligarchs and corporate people have, that pales in comparison to the combined strength of the consumer strength of the masses, because they get their money from, as you should know, the consumers, the masses, right? That's where they get their resources and power from in the first place. So,
wait, I really need to say this because this is super important, and this goes in hand with my point. The reason that these consumers are paying all this money to these ruling people is because they have something. They have, like I said, resources, because money's value is only determined by how people are going to give it up to get these, again, like I said, resources. That's the important thing to talk about here, and I don't know why.
No, it's not. Like, it's not.
Yes, it absolutely is. The fact that you would not value resources and the way that they're distributed in society is absurd to me. This is, if anything, this is the naive approach to politics. Resources are used to control societies, and they can be used to control societies.
No, it's not. So
it absolutely is.
The primary form in which private entities exert so-called control over so-called resources is not actually by owning each and every individual piece of raw material and commodities. It's through brands, it's through trademarks and logos, and it's through corporate enterprises and things like that. And those in turn direct the production of certain commodities in a certain direction. Not on the basis of reproducing the power of the bourgeoisie politically, but on the basis of accumulating profit. These are enterprises whose goal is to be profitable for investors, specifically for shareholders, right? In the case of corporate. So there's a discontent. When they want to deal with maintaining their power politically, that's a different thing, okay? So you're making it seem like we're living in like some kind of like Minecraft multiplayer PvP battle where it's like, oh, who has the most resource? It's like, it's not how it works, dude.
Wait, but the money is used to keep it so that they are above the working class. This is what they do with it. This is
wait.
By paying off politicians. It happens all the time.
Exactly. So they do it through funding think tanks, institutions, lobbying, and funding media.
Yes,
that's what they do, right?
Right. They have the resource, which is money, because money is a resource, and they're using it to lobby and gain control. Okay. This is where economics and politics disassociate them and not understand the strong correlation between them.
That money is just the surpluses that are coming from their profits. It's just spare money they have to spend on that. The primary goal that they have with the so-called
is to keep making more profit, which gives them more power over the working class.
No, they do not care about power over the working class. They just care about profit. It's nothing personal, kid. It's just business.
I know it's not anything personal. However, when they have this, they're still taking from these people. Like, I don't understand where the fundamental disagreement is. I don't care what Jeff Bezos' intent is. What he's doing through him trying to make as much profit possible, he's doing all these things, making conditions for his workers less bearable, all this shit. This is just a consequence of what I don't think his philosophy is. If his philosophy is only motivated by profit, then he's still going to find a way to maximize his profit. It's
actually not just profit primarily for someone like Jeff Bezos for these new platforms. It's not even really profit is just the measurement of their success. It's really about maintaining the platform, maintaining Amazon, making sure Amazon can grow, making sure Amazon can invest in other things and make more things. Like, it's not really so much. I mean, like, personal power is not really a big factor in this whole thing. And I think
Right.
you're
But the
over
consequence of
personalizing.
him keeping Amazon afloat is it means he's going to have to squash his competition. He's going to have to squash all these other people
Yeah, but
who are
he's
making it
serving.
so. If
He's
someone poses a threat, which competition obviously does, competition being able to be started by everyone else in a given society, if they're able to, he's going to have to squash them in order to keep his platform afloat, which means he's causing a direct consequential harm to the working class.
Jeff Bezos is trying to work in the interests of the Amazon corporation. And part of
And the
that,
interest of the Amazon corporation is keeping itself sustained. When it keeps itself sustained, it's going to have to resort to all the measures possible to keep itself alive. Because, like I said, this functions with a business too, because a business is run by people, and survival is an imperative of
why do you,
anyone's.
dude, you ramble so much. Can you just stop rambling and get to
No,
the point?
I'm rambling, and everything I'm saying is coherent and makes sense. So whether I'm rambling or not doesn't matter. I'm
I
making a
don't,
fucking point.
I cannot discern a point from what you're saying. What is your point? That he
So
has
my
to
whole
cross his
point, since we
competition.
led this conversation in this direction, is that you're all like, "Oh, politics and economics are completely different things. They're separated from each other."
I didn't
And this is
say
just an
that there's
absurd
no.
take of reality. Whether you want to say that I'm being naive because I'm playing
No,
political
you're
Minecraft,
putting words into
it's
my
absurd.
mouth. What I
No,
said.
that's exactly what you said, and you can rewind this and go back and say economic.
Keep talking over me, dude.
You know what? I'd love to keep talking over you because the shit you're saying makes no sense and has no
You
value.
sound mad as hell. So
I'm
first
not
of
mad
all,
as hell.
yeah, first of all,
No, I'm just right as hell. That's all there is to it.
and the way you prove you're right is by making it so that you talk over your opponent so they can't reveal what a dumbass rambling idiot you are.
Well, then I'm doing a damn good job of it.
Yeah, anyway, Dylan, what I said actually was not that you're alleging that politics and economics have a relationship, something I never denied. I am accusing you of thinking that they're the same thing, that they operate on the same plane and the same level. But what I'm trying to say is that they operate on different, intelligibly different levels.
The correlation is so strong, though, and this is the point I'm making. They might as well be the same thing, the way that they're tied into each other and
No,
how they're
they are
used.
not the same thing.
No, if you want to talk about objective reality, right, then you'll understand that the political power that certain people have also factors in with their economic standings. The correlation is that strong.
But that doesn't mean that Jeff Bezos exists to have political power.
I never said he did. Just the fact that he
Okay, so
does,
what
because of
point?
the conditions that surround his life.
So, okay, let me just rein this in and simplify your argument as far as I can hear it. What you're saying is that the goal is to impoverish the ruling class as much as possible because that way the ruling class won't be able to use its spare chump change in order to direct politics. The issue with that is that you're not taking into account the fact that the most of the capital, right, that the ruling class uses is not for purposes of using it as a political resource, but for the economy. So you're basically saying let's bankrupt the economy as a whole so that they won't have enough if they don't have, let me just put it this way, if the ruling class does not have enough money to bribe the politicians, they don't even have enough money to exist in the first place.
That's a really absurd way of characterizing my argument. The goal isn't to bankrupt the ruling class. The goal is to try and make it so they're unable to exert power over the proletarian.
And by power,
So
what
they
do
can
you
have money. They can have money, but we can set it up. We can set society up in such a way that people are able to have relative levels of power to each other through making it so people are able to get an education, be able to set themselves up for positions where they can, become like Bezos, become like Gates, whoever. They can do
look. I don't necessarily disagree with that as far as a minimal program is concerned. But the 2 points of contention I'm unpersuaded by. First, that the means by doing this can be outside of an independent party, and that second, the only that second, I guess what really is your point about this reformism? Like, oh, the only reason a revolution would happen is because we didn't take the necessary precautions to ensure the smooth success.
That's not been the point, though. The point is we can reform and wait, no. We can reform and reform until we get to a point, because a revolution is inevitable, like you and I agreed upon at the beginning of this conversation.
Okay.
So
let's talk about meat and potatoes. Did you agree with Jimmy Dore's force the vote?
No. It's a childish way of playing politics.
Sure. You are sitting here making all of these audacious claims about your desire to have reforms and reforms and reforms, and for free. No one even paid you. You sitting here and opposing probably like the simplest way to actually make Medicare for all maybe possible. Just Medicare for all in the middle of a fucking pandemic. You can't even reform your way into Medicare for all in the middle of a fucking pandemic. How are you sitting here talking about all your little audacious plans for reform?
So do you think that it's wait. So, like I said, the conditions surrounding which people can. Do you think that like one or two people who support Medicare for all in a party are going to just be able to push it and get it passed? Because this is like this really, really stupid way of looking at things. Like,
but all of these Democratic Congress people are on record saying that they support Medicare for all, and that moreover,
that's them playing politics to get your vote. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to.
Why don't you just hold them to it? Why don't you just hold them to it?
Because there are things surrounding, like, other, like, do you want Republicans to get into power? You're gonna laugh. Dude,
Mr. Reformist is making excuses for why you can't get
there's
the
no fucking
simplest
excuse
reform.
Here. Okay, wait.
You're making
this is a really stupid, childish laugh.
Mr. Reformist. You're gonna do all these reforms. You have the fucking balls to challenge the Democrats about Medicare.
Yeah, because the establishment holds enough power over the people to make it so they can't push the reforms. It's that simple.
Why are you shooting?
Because the threat of Republicans seizing power, these fucking conservative liberal hacks are gonna come in and take over.
That's not true.
That's a threat. That's a very real threat to the working class.
Fucking myth. That's not even fucking true. You're talking out
of your fucking ass. Who do you think's gonna come seize power?
This is fucking proof of why revolutionaries are better than reformists. Reformists pussy out and cave in, even when it comes to reform.
I want you to answer the question.
You bitch out. You bitch out. Even when it comes to reforms, even when it comes to the simplest, most reasonable reform, nothing radical, Medicare for all during a fucking pandemic, you bitch out. I'm a reformist. I want to get a reform done. Oh, fuck Jimmy Dore and force the vote.
Look, you little soy boy bitch, because I know you like calling people that. All right, wait, Haz. You're being an ignorant, naive little child who needs fucking bullshit.
I'm a political strategist. It's a strategy game. I'm playing the game of
Thrones. What do you think it is? What do you think? You just wave your cock in the air and have shit happen?
I supported Jimmy Dore. I supported the force the vote. I support all those things.
Yeah, and I support Medicare for all, but him acting like he's just gonna fucking remove AOC from power. We have the power. Is a stupid way of framing it. This is a politically inconsiderate, stupid way of framing it.
You're not even a reformist. You're literally just a reactionary.
A reactionary to what? What have I reacted to, other than your stupidity?
To the American reformist progressive cause to get Medicare for all during a fucking pandemic.
Yeah, so the thing is do you think that we're able to that simply push the vote? Do you think that, everything's happy and dandy and we can just push the vote?
I do, yes.
Well, then I'm not the naive one, it's you.
Yeah, and if you can't, you could kickstart a movement to literally overthrow all the sitting Congress people in the Democratic Party next midterms.
I mean, they tried that on January 6th. That didn't go damn well, did it?
What?
Never fucking mind. Do you think that it's that easy to throw together a little party and have your little merry dance through Congress and throw AOC out of her little chair?
Like, you can unseat the people who opposed it, even though they were on record saying they supported it, yeah.
Yeah, so playing politics and deciding, oh shit, the Republicans are the ones who are going to seize power if I don't keep this in power.
Dude, Biden won the fucking election. You can chill about the Republicans now, can't you? That's what you were saying. Harm reduction.
They're still in Congress. They're still able to exert pressure on the people.
They said they were going to push Biden left, and all they did was become to the right of Biden himself. Biden pushed them
No one's
right.
to the right of Biden here. I know you want to talk to your chat like that, but
Objectively, you are, though.
how am I to the right of Biden?
Because I bet you if Biden was like sufficiently pressured, he would probably like do Medicare for all. If he was like,
then I'd like to pressure Biden into it. However, Jimmy Dore's real grassroots.
You can't even pressure the fucking congressional Democrats to do it. How are
Yeah,
you
so we're
gonna
going to pressure them.
How are you gonna pressure the fucking president?
Do you think you can just wave your cock around and have a magical Medicare for all appear by saying, we're not going to vote you back in? Do you think Jimmy Dore has the platform to sway elections?
No, alone he doesn't.
Oh, good. There you go. You gave us an answer. I'm so happy you gave us an
you want to
answer.
keep screaming, dumbass? Remember to let me explain why.
I mean, screaming seems like a viable
Jimmy
option.
Dore alone couldn't do it, but if all of the influencers on the fucking internet, all of the other big ones were on board, they probably fucking could. The problem is that dumbasses like you were shooting yourself in the fucking foot, saying, "No, we can't do it." You guys are the ones who fucked up the whole fucking thing for no fucking reason. I don't get it.
Well, how many
fed?
fucking people
Are
do
you
you think
paid
there are
up?
online?
Why do you
How many
fucking
people do you
cuck
think there are with
yourself?
political power online?
Political
No.
cuck. Political
You're a little
cuck.
cock. You're a little bitch. You're moving with some fake movement. You have this little immaterial bullshit you threw together and hoped and prayed it worked.
Dude,
It's
you're
not
gonna
working.
be the emperor of America, Daenerys Dylan Targaryen. You're gonna be the savior of America, altruistically benefiting the working class from the reins of power. Machiavellian, Peter Baelish, Dylan Peter Baelish from Game of Thrones. That's what you're gonna be. I'm Machiavellian playing the game for the working class. Go do it, dude. Go do it, you fucking pussy. Go fucking do it.
Okay, I'll fucking do it, you
Go do
idiot.
it. Go do it. And I'm gonna fucking laugh at you when you fail, and you are gonna fail, I promise.
And your fucking movement has failed too. You have 9,000 followers on Twitch. Do you really think you're going to enact
And a few months ago, I had half of that. So I'm rising and I'm growing, and I'm not going to stop growing. I had 200 viewers a few months ago. Now I'm at 600, 700 on the fucking regular. I'm
Well,
rising.
I hope you can go win a damn election with that. You're going to do a great job with your 500 voters.
Do not use my Twitch and YouTube career as an example of failure, dude, because that's the most successful fucking shit you've ever seen on the fucking internet. What a horrible fucking attempt to fucking
get at me. So you and your 600 followers are going to go win an election right now.
600 viewers, and I'm going to do way more than you ever will in your whole fucking life, little boy. I promise you that much. Promise you that much. I promise you that much. I vow that much. I vow on my ancestors' grave that I will have way more of an impact on this world than you ever will. Please prove me wrong.
Be remembered as the guy who screamed at children on the internet. I'm so happy.
We'll see whose legacy endures and lives on, Dylan.
All right.
So something wrong with your microphone too. Like, I don't know what you did to it. You hit something or did something, and it's been, I didn't want to say anything, but it's been sounding weird since. I don't know what you did.
Me neither. Want to get into the Q&A?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. So, God. All right, so let's pull up some of the super chats that we have. From Eucalyme, Dylan, I'm on your side, but can you stop deep throating your mic? I can't understand a word you're saying. Okay, I think that's something that he did to his mic. Actually, you'll notice it when you watch it back, Dylan. Like there was a point where you actually touched your mic or something, and it like I don't know if you unplugged something or did something.
Oh yeah, no, I accidentally unplugged it.
Yeah, so it's making it sounds like echoey or something. All right, so from Marcus Sargov. Dylan keeps misusing material conditions to mean standard of living. That's not what that means, kid. Read Marx. Thank you for this.
So that's a stupid fucking statement. Material conditions don't have to be standard of living. They just have to be the objective things, we like using that word around here, that surround someone's life. So it doesn't mean standard of living. It can mean where they were born, where they grew up, what school they went to. It's all this fucking shit. It all matters.
That would be actually personal background, not necessarily material conditions.
Yeah, personal background, the conditions that surround their upbringing. I'm happy you came to that conclusion.
I'm willing to bet you don't know anything about what material conditions actually means.
Okay, so
how much?
God. From P1. Thanks for the super chat. The reason reform failed is because, as Dore correctly pointed out, the Justice Democrats did not withhold their vote from Pelosi and her seat. Simple. Okay. Let me see what we got here and the ones that I can pull up. From Full Metal, thanks for super chat. Question for Hawes: do we need the Vanguard Party to end these West Wing LARPers?
I think we need like a Netflix Vanguard party so we can dictate the future seasons of House of Cards and make sure that people won't be inspired by it in the way this
Look,
guy
as
is.
much as
That
I
was
love
a
your
question
TV
somebody
references, I
asked
don't
in
watch
chat.
fucking TV.
Somebody asked in chat. I remember writing that one down. If asking if Dylan has seen House of Cards. I think that was from.
I don't watch TV. I really don't.
Cap.
I
No. You can go through my Netflix right now. The last thing I watched was The Office.
Okay. I
was
can't
like
believe you
7
haven't seen
months
Game
ago.
of Thrones. Like, who hasn't seen Game of Thrones? It's
I
terrible.
can't afford
I
HBO.
haven't.
Get the fuck out of here.
Never
It's
seen one
embarrassing.
episode.
Me neither.
All right. So from Bob Jude, thanks for the super chat. Why does Haas think that politics and money are discontinuous? It's such a silly statement. Can he clarify and have Dylan respond?
Yeah, because if you read Marx, money is to make more money. And some of that money is used to influence the outcome of political ends. So there's a discontinuous relationship. They're related, obviously, but it's not one continuity. There's a discontinuity between them. It's as simple as that.
Should I respond to that or?
Sure, if you want to.
So my big issue with that line of thinking, though, is that if we want to look at reality, we see the effect having money has on the world around us, and to act like it doesn't matter doesn't make a difference. It's absurd.
That's not a response to what I said, though.
Okay, well, I mean, like, if you want to talk about what Marx said, that doesn't really matter.
Well, it
'Cause
matters to me.
What?
Matters to me.
Okay, I'm happy it matters to
What
you.
matters to you is what Kevin Spacey said in House of Cards, and I like Marx.
Hey, Kevin Spacey is a fun little man.
From Fanel, he said, "What's the true definition of socialism? It seems that socialists cannot agree on a universal definition. Just curious."
You want me to respond?
Yeah.
A mode of production whose mode fulfills social and common ends.
There's only one definition I care about, and that's getting the means of production into the hands of the working class.
We know what Chomsky taught you. It's okay.
Chomsky was right then. Base Chomsky.
No, he was actually full of shit.
All right, so let's see what we have jotted down. Oh wait, we got another one. Thanks for the super chat, you climb. When has revolution ever worked in the first world? Living standards continue to rise due to reform. 2% of GDP went towards social spending in 1900, now 40%. Why can't we keep reforming to 100%?
Because literally no one would argue that the welfare state's model of spending money, to like keep disabled people and old people and unemployed people afloat is a viable way to sustain an economy of scale. So that's why you can't. And the second thing is that you couldn't even maintain the welfare state that happened after World War II. It was rolled back in the 1970s, even in the Scandinavian countries after the Soviet Union collapsed, because there was no longer any pressure to maintain those things.
Okay, from Maxwell. Thanks for the super chat. Question to Dylan. How do you plan to reform the labor aristocracy?
I don't know. I really don't. Haven't thought about that one.
Okay.
I'll bite the bullet on that. I'd like to find a way, and when I figure it out,
All right.
see where we go from there. Right?
So from Java Bolt, question for Haas. You said you don't care about harm reduction. If this is true, why do you care about socialism? If the level of harm is the same in a capitalist socialist, if the level of harm is the same in a capitalist / socialist is the same, what is socialism offering than capitalism isn't? This wasn't written very well.
First and foremost, it's a philosophical disagreement with something that has its origins in British utilitarianism. I don't come from this background of utilitarianism. I don't view reality as a lever with which to maximize or minimize this or that variable. It's not just about harm, it's any variable. To me, socialism is about something in reality. It's about articulating and participating in reality in a certain way. That's what it is to me.
From Real Pluto, question for Dylan. What, if any, Marxist works have you read? Works? I'm guessing you meant
Books, like books.
Okay,
And
yeah.
shit. So, okay. I mean, I'd have to pull up a list. It's quite a few. I mean, I was telling Brittany before I got on stream, I reread one of my favorites, which is Socialism, Scientific and Utopian. Or maybe it's the other way around. I'm tired. I started on T. Turing. I read Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. I've read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, the Communist Manifesto. There's quite a few things I've read, actually. I mean, like, if you want me to, I don't really feel like going, you know.
Unrelated, Como would like to know what Haas was eating.
I
Hey,
was
you can't just
eating
steal my tricks.
Ethiopian chicken on rice, not on injera bread. And the reason I had rice is because I don't know.
Okay.
First space thing that was said all night by you.
So from Baby Tossin Bandit, serious question. I'm pretty politically illiterate, so I could be dumb, but is China actually run like a socialist communist country? I know they have the Communist Party, but the name alone doesn't mean much, right?
So China is a socialist country, and I mean, China is essentially being run in this sort of fashion to where they're trying to at least get to communism by means of socialism and market reforms, and they have a gradual process to which they're trying to get there with.
Let's see what else we got here. So from Red Devil's Advocate, okay, they want to know what was your most embarrassing moment. I don't know if that's like just in general or but we could just move on. You guys.
When your dad caught me with your mom.
Okay. I feel like we walked into that. Okay. So Black Lennon, question for Dylan. Wait, I think we already read that one. Okay. From Western Artifact to Haas, one of your comrades claims freedom of speech is stupid. Is this your position? Seems like if you're going to trust a worker to run the government, they should be able to talk.
What are my comrades? I don't know what you're talking about. At least in the current context of big tech, I am for the maximal amount of political speech possible. I will never be behind any form of political censorship on these big tech platforms.
Let's see what else we got here. From Cute Root, ask them what happened after Stalin's death. If Hazat doesn't believe commies play what do you say, Machiavellian game? What is
Machiavellian.
Machiavellian. Fuck, I can't say that word. Machiavellian. Did I say it right?
Machiavellian.
Yeah, so since we have a dumbass in the chat, what I actually said, I guess people needed to explain to them, was that this is not how communists can seize power from the perspective of a bourgeois state. There are various intrigues and plots that happened in communist states. But I know we get it, dude. You watched the movie The Death of Stalin. You know, I know that's where you got it from too. I know that's where you got that from too. And congratulations, you're so smart for watching that movie. But yeah.
From Eucalyme. Social spending dropped for 60 to 40% due to neoliberalism, and now it's on the rise again. The overall trend is up. A small dip doesn't change that.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you're making a meme. The more social spending a country has as a percentage of its GDP, the more socialister it is. Actually, that's not true. A lot of things can be spent in the name of social spending that have nothing to do with socialism at all. But good job, dude.
Okay. Let's see. I think we're kind of almost done, but pull up some of these, I guess. You know what? I think we could probably end up there. All right. So if you guys want to do closing statements, final thoughts, we can do that. Dylan, you want to go first?
I mean, sure. I guess my closing statement was we kind of got way the fuck off topic. Doesn't really matter. I'm sure it was still good content. And well, I have a lot of fundamental disagreements with what my opponent said in regards to politics and economics being all like discontinuous and all of this other stuff. I mean, I don't know. I guess I didn't really convince him, but I hope I convinced the audience. I didn't really come with a closing statement because I didn't think we'd be here.
Okay. All right. So, Oz.
Yeah, it's a shame we didn't actually get to like argue about the topics at hand, like about parties and revolutions. But it's interesting that he thinks that capitalists primarily exist to hold political power and not to make profit, which is interesting, but okay.
Loving the mischaracterization of my argument.
Well, if they're not discontinuous, then they're the same thing.
They're not.
All right. Well,
The argument wasn't that they only exist to make profit.
Well, you already had your closing statement, so it's
Okay, well,
all right. So I'm gonna put our Discord link one more time in the chat because we have just rebuilt it for the millionth time, and hopefully it'll last longer than the last one. So go join that. We're going to be back tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern for a debate on Afghanistan. And we are going to be doing also a live interview with, I believe it is, who is it? Martinez Perspective. So we're going to be doing an interview with him tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. And everything else you can find on the schedule. We just did get another super chat really quick. So from Reclaim has imagined not being against, I'm hearing myself echo, being against censorship on the internet platforms, but unironically defending USSR. This dude is a beta male. He'd be speaking it in the, okay, that'll do. All right, so I'm gonna close this down.
Yeah, and just to quickly address that fact, yeah. Completely different context, completely different situations, but thank you for giving all of this generous money to make a dumbass of yourself. And yeah, free money for the show which I support. So yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna try to do a raid again because I am figuring this out. Somebody with not a lot of people watching.
I actually gotta go now, but
all right, thank you so much for coming on, Haas.
No
we'll see you.
Thanks a lot, bro.
See you later, man. See you.
Good night.
Okay, guys, I'll see you on the show, Zerka's show.